It's really great to be here with all of you. Rebecca and I were discussing that there would be some people here who are uh, mostly new to the Michael teachings, and could I do something that would give an overview of the teachings? So what we came up with was to choose someone who had never had their chart channeled before, and I would channel it and surprise them at the event with the results. So this is Ritana Morgan, and she has not seen her chart until this morning, and she's been very eagerly awaiting it. So that's why
I still haven't seen it.
Oh.
I haven't looked at it because
Okay.
I was directed not to by my really close friend.
Okay.
He wants it to be a huge surprise, I suppose.
Well, here you go.
Okay.
You'll want to switch that off now.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay. So this is the big reveal, your chart, and I'm going to talk about it. My intention is to teach this material in such a way that it's going to be interesting to people at all levels of the Michael teachings. The Michael teachings are unique in the annals of channeled literature because, as far as I know, they are the only channeled body of material that is brought through an entire system with terminology. In virtually every spiritual teaching or religion, there is the shared idea that we are all, in our core, an eternal being, a soul, if you will. But what is so useful and unique about the Michael teachings is that they explain what that soul is, and the fact is that there are 7 different basic models of souls, that we aren't all the same, and that there are all sorts of other specificities to the soul that make each of us as unique as a snowflake. Whereas I think you get the vague picture with most religions and spiritual teachings that all souls are like a drop of water in the ocean, that they're all basically the same. And therefore, knowing this information explains so much about why we are the way we are, why other people are the way they are, and how we can relate to each other with respect and understanding, how we can know our strengths and build on them, how we can know our potential weaknesses and bring them up to greater strength, how we can validate why we're drawn to certain things, why we're good at certain things, why certain careers work really well for us and other ones don't. And I feel that these teachings are so useful that they could be a great tool for the evolution for humanity. A lot of people have read Michael books, particularly the 4 Michael books by an author named Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough. A couple of them were bestsellers, so there are a lot of Michael books sitting on people's shelves, but they haven't ever quite taken off yet in the mainstream. But I think it could happen, and the more that we understand the system, not just intellectually, but on a gut level, the better able we are to teach it to others. Every Michael channel has a little bit of a different slant on the teachings. There are some discrepancies. Some of you will not agree with everything that I say in this and my next workshop, and that's just fine. Michael instructs us to self-validate and just to look upon everything that's offered with curiosity, with interest, with trying it on for size. And if it doesn't fit, then you just put it aside. But sometimes a new insight will give you a huge aha that even can change your life. The way I do my Michael charts is on this form that you each have, which is on my computer database. And so you'll notice that at the top of each half, the essence half and the overleaves half, there are 4 headings: inspiration, expression, action, and assimilation. You might also notice that the first 3 are divided in half: ordinal and cardinal. This chart is actually a grid, but I didn't have room to make just lines to make it clear that it's a 7-column chart, but that's really what it is. And if you can follow down with your eyes here, like for example at the upper left-hand corner where it says inspiration ordinal, if you go down the chart, you'll see inspiration ordinal. You'll see that all of these traits align. So for example, if you go down to the chief obstacle or chief feature of self-deprecation, you'll see that that is on the ordinal side of the inspiration axis, just like the role of server. And so if you want to become an expert in the Michael teachings, you don't just look at individual traits and try to validate them as individuals. You look at the chart as a whole, which is why I'm very reluctant to channel just 1 or 2 of people's Michael information. I like to get the whole chart, because if you leave something out, it may then puzzle the person because it doesn't explain something about that person that they were looking to see in the chart. And also, interpreting the chart as a whole means that we look at how much is on the ordinal side of the inspiration axis and how much is on the cardinal side of the action axis. So I know some of you are confused, and I'm going to explain what these things mean. The 4 axes, inspiration, expression, action, and assimilation, are like 4 universal qualities or flavors. Inspiration is the inner world, like the fire that burns within you. And what is bright and shiny within you is inspiring, and that's why we call it the inspiration axis. It's what is within. And so every trait on the inspiration axis concerns your inner world. The next axis, expression, is about bringing what is in the inner world out into the outer world, and that would be communication, obviously, self-expression, performance, that sort of thing. So inside out, that is expression. The action axis is more purely about the outer world itself. It's about doing. It's about what you can see. It's about down to earth. So these are the 3 basic qualities. Inside, bringing what is inside out, and the outer world. And then we have the assimilation axis, which stands to the side like a library, like an observatory, providing resources for the other 3. The first 3 are divided into ordinal and cardinal. And ordinal is contracted, and cardinal is expanded. Now, when I say contracted, I don't mean that in a bad way. It just means like if you have a camera and you have a zoom lens, you zoom in on an individual detail. And so traits that are ordinal are detail-oriented. They're specific. Traits that are cardinal are the opposite. They're expanded, they're wide, they're broad, and they're general. So let's talk about the expression axis. We have 2 expression axis roles, and the roles are those 7 types of souls, those 7 models. Each of us has a particular role or soul type, and you have one and you have only one. However, because you have to look at the chart as a whole, you will see that there are all sorts of secondary and tertiary traits that will modify your basic role. So there are many different kinds of artisans, many different kinds of sages, many different kinds of warriors. But the fundamental quality of, say, the sage will always be there. There will always be a particular look, feel, expression, quality to every sage that's held in common. With some it is more obvious, and some it is more subtle, but it will always be there. So the two expression axis roles are artisan and sage. Artisans, remember, expression axis, they like to express in an ordinal or specific way, and that translates as souls who are attracted to and are generally very good at working with their hands, craft, design, things like architecture, interior decorating, fixing the plumbing, anything related to form. That is ordinal, it's specific. So the artisan will see something material that needs to be fixed and will intuitively know how to fix it and will do so. That's ordinality. And even though we're talking about artisans here, you can get a sense of what ordinality means on all the other axes. And if you understand this basic framework of the four axes and ordinal and cardinal, it will bring you so much understanding of your whole chart, of every trait that is on your chart. So then, to illustrate cardinality, the sage role, which is also on the expression axis, is cardinal expression, expanded expression. And what that means, there's several sage souls here, as you know. Sages like to express themselves through abstract things, not concrete things, through ideas, through insights. Insights are big things. They're not concrete. They're in consciousness. Another way of looking at it for you advanced Michael students is that artisan is like the intellectual center, specific thought forms, and sage is like higher intellectual center, which is concepts, insights, ideas, and they complement. So now I've laid a framework, and we're going to talk about Ratana's chart. Ratana's role is artisan, but she has a discarnate sage essence twin and sage primary casting. And I've heard from some of you who know Ratana, who were trying to guess her chart ahead of time, that there was some disagreement whether she was going to come out as an artisan or a sage. And if you look at the chart, you can understand why there would be confusion about this, because both of her primary secondary traits are sage. So she is a very sagey artisan. And therefore, it would be perfectly understandable for some people to see that sagely ebullience and think this is a sage. So how can you validate the difference when sage and artisan are kind of similar to each other to begin with, because they're both expressive? Well, the main difference is ordinal versus cardinal. And so I don't know Ratana at all. We've hardly spoken. And so this was all just straight channeling. I was sent her photograph so that Michael could identify what soul we were talking about. And yet, just in the couple of minutes we've been up here, Ratana was singing to herself and comforting herself, because being in front of a large audience is not comfortable for her. If she were a sage, this would not be an issue, I promise you.
Unless I'm singing.
Unless you're singing.
Unless I'm singing, then
And that, yes, and a lot of, you will find a lot of artisans who are performers, like Meryl Streep, for example. It's a beautiful example of that. But the artisans who are performing are not interested in the audience. They're interested in their craft. And when they are done, they don't feel real comfortable signing everyone's autographs that are waiting at the stage door. It's a stage door. Yeah. Good one. Yeah.
That was a Michael.
It's a Michael, the sage door, yeah. I'm a sage door Johnny, yes. Yeah. So, this afternoon I'm doing a longer program called Discerning Roles. And we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail, how you can discern, figure out the difference. But if you first meet someone, you might have trouble, for example, telling whether they're a warrior or king, because there are those similarities. So you do want to look for, is this a more ordinal person or a cardinal person? And the role is the number one thing in determining that. However, I also do a thing where I study the chart as a whole, and we get kind of an aggregate cardinality or ordinality. So, for example, Ella has a sage essence twin, and that is a cardinal influence because it's the bleed through of actual sage energy. But she has sage casting. The casting system I use is not the raw number system. They are two different systems, and you can have different results with both. They do not correlate. You have one kind of casting in the Yarbrough system, which is based on the initial casting from the Tao by roll, and then divided up from there. And then you can also have your raw number, which I understand from talking to Mike and JP and Ed and others have done some research on this. I understand that to be more about how an entity decides to divvy up the tasks on the physical plane. So these are both, thank you. So these are they're both valid, they're both true in the raw number system. According to JP, I have priest and server casting. On this chart, I have no priest or server influences, so it was a helpful additional piece of information. But I don't channel that on my chart. So here we're talking about the Yarbrough casting that was in More Messages from Michael in the chapter called Michael Math. So this is what we have here. And in Michael Math casting, if you have sage casting, that's ordinal. It's the opposite of the roll. And the reason for that is that when you count off 1 through 7, the numbers 1 through 3 are the first half. They come first, and therefore they are cardinal, even though they resonate with the roles of server, artisan, and warrior. And then sage is in the second half, so it's 5. So here you have ordinal primary casting, and you have some fairly cardinal overleaves. Flow is neutral. Spiritualist is cardinal, as is power mode is cardinal. So you do have some cardinality, and most of us are a mix of some ordinality and cardinality, but surely as a sage cast artisan, the overwhelmingly dominant quality here is ordinality. So there are some obvious descriptors for ordinality. Ordinal people, such as Terry Benning, just saying she likes one-on-one more. Ordinal people have a kind of shyness, and it is not the same shyness that you have with the chief obstacle of arrogance, where you're afraid people are going to judge you. It's just, and this is especially true for the two most ordinal roles, server and artisan, it's just this feeling that you're better equipped for one-on-one, that you're just more comfortable there. I believe, and this is very controversial, so I'm just sharing my view, that Hillary Clinton is an artisan. And there's been so much talk about how much better she is one-on-one in person than in front of a group. Whereas her husband, Bill Clinton, is a sage, and he is fantastic with social skills, because that's the sage specialty. So he's very comfortable with that. And just incidentally, one way you can validate roles is if they're in a coupling, and it seems to be a classic coupling. There are certain roles that are classic, that they are attracted to each other rather routinely. This is not foolproof. In fact, there's nothing that I will tell you about tools for self-validation that works 100% of the time. But this does aid in validation. I am a sage, and I'm absolutely nuts about artisans. And artisans tend to adore sages. And you will often see sage-artisan couples. And so there's no law that says that Bill Clinton, as a sage, would not be attracted to and marry a warrior or a king or anything else, because the soul craves variety and will mate with all the roles in different lifetimes. But it's very common to find sages and artisans, which is one way that I personally validate her as an artisan. Another way I validate her as an artisan is that if you Google goofy Hillary Clinton, you will see tons of photographs of her with very childlike, goofy, rubbery smiles, faces that she's making, and that sort of thing. When she's trying to be presidential, she suppresses that. But artisans are the most childlike role. They like to play. And anything you could say about artisans, you could say to a lesser extent about sages. Sages are also childlike and playful. And we tend to age more slowly. And so when I was 30, I looked 18. And even now, most people don't guess that I'm 93. So, yeah. So that's...
Is that all?
That's an expression axis kind of thing. Childlike, playful, goofy. If you have a sage or an artisan who has been traumatized, who's been damaged, and they don't play, and they don't smile or laugh, you might have a hard time validating them. When I'm trying to guess someone's role, I like to see a smile, because the way they smile tells me a lot about their role. And there's a particular way that each role smiles that you can validate. And sages smile with a kind of mischievous look in their face. It's like I'm teasing you. Artisans smile with they're just radiant, childlike, sweet, adorable. Adorable is the key artisan word. And this is not going to be true of every artisan, because what if the artisan has a discarnate king essence twin and warrior casting and aggression mode? That is a very different looking artisan in this lifetime than an artisan who is more stereotypical. We teach in the Michael teachings through stereotypes, and unfortunately a lot of the books portray traits in their most extreme and often extremely negative versions. So, for example, if you're teaching young souls and illustrating that with Donald Trump, then anybody that you channel as being young, they're going to be very offended if you say that they're young, because Donald Trump is actually, a damaged person. He's anyone who is 70 acting like a 2-year-old having a tantrum has not successfully completed their second internal monad, and some of you know what that means. And so, but if you take that as an example, and I mean, he is an example of a young king, but just a very negative one. So a lot of the traits in the writings give very negative examples of things, and therefore you get a chart with something that you have this negative impression of. You don't feel that fits you because you're doing it in a more positive pole way. And the fact is that if any trait that you do fully in the positive pole, and everything has a positive and negative pole, doing it in the positive pole means that you're coming from unconditional love, that it's not distorting, it's authentic, it's kind, there's no fear behind it. Any trait that you do in the positive pole becomes less visible. It becomes more integrated into who you are. You can still see it. So for example, I have a goal of acceptance, and anyone with a goal of acceptance has that nice guy quality. If you see someone who is struggling with the goal of acceptance and has other abrading overleaves, means other things on the chart that pull in a different direction or that can cause problems with that, you might not see that nice guy, warm, friendly, sociable quality so much in them. So the Michael teachings are quite subtle and specific. I would compare them to astrology, that if you just go by your horoscope in the newspaper based on your sun sign, most of the time you're likely to say, well, I don't know if that fits or not, that's very general. If you go to a master astrologer who looks at everything on the chart and how it relates together, you're going to get a lot more zeroing in on, yes, this is what it is. And a lot of us in the teachings, because we just don't know them well enough, we don't know what the different qualities look and feel like, we jump to a lot of conclusions based on superficial evidence that when you get right down to it, that trait that you have could come from a lot of different places. It could come from many different places on your Michael chart, and it could also come from your astrology, your numerology, it could come from your imprinting. And so it's very important to learn not to jump to quick conclusions based on one trait that you see. So for example, if you run into someone who talks a lot, so many, particularly more beginning Michael students, will immediately say, that person's gregarious, they talk a lot, they have to be a sage. And there are quiet sages. And I have seen talkative people of every role. And so you can't just go by one thing. But if you want to become an expert validator of this material, you begin to take notes and notice lots of different things and what they add up to. And I will teach this afternoon that the number one thing that you can use to validate are the eyes. The eyes, the smile, the facial expression. If you can learn to spot the traits that way, I would say that's through the demeanor of the person, you're going to get a lot better at this material. I think the most accurate way is to get a full chart channeled by someone that is good at getting chart information. Now, all channels have specialties. Some people are really strong with charts. Some people are really strong with interpersonal relationships. And so everyone has their strength and weakness. But if you have a good, accurate chart, you should be able to validate it. So Artisan has a positive pole of creation and a negative pole of artifice. Artisans are the most creative of all the roles. And sometimes people will say, well, I couldn't possibly be an artisan because I'm not creative. And people have said that about Hillary Clinton. They don't see her baking cookies. She even complained about that once, that I don't bake cookies. They don't see her doing things with her hands. About 30% of the United States is artisans, and 22% of all souls on any planet are artisans. But you don't see that many people who are fine artists. And you don't see, and you see a lot of people of other roles who are fine artists. You'll see a lot of sages, for example. But, think of Georgia O'Keeffe, who was a warrior, who was a great artist. Art belongs to everyone. It's part of humanity. We can safely say that artisans are specialists in this, but they are not going to want to be an artist in every single lifetime, because the soul wants to experience all of life, wants to be as creative as possible in as many different ways. You will see a lot of male artisans who are in construction, who fix things. You might not think of them as soft and airy-fairy. Let's say an artisan with warrior secondary traits. You might see them out there, pounding nails or crawling under the crawl space to replumb, that sort of thing. There are a lot of different kinds of artisans. But what you will find in every artisan is an instinctive understanding of structure, form, how things fit together. A lot of young children will take things apart. The artisans love to take things apart, and they can often put them back together after they've done that. There's just this sense of how that works. The negative pole is artifice or self-deception. The dark side of very high creativity is that you can create your own reality that doesn't bear any resemblance to anybody else's reality. And there can also be a certain kind of phoniness, like shortcuts taken, where you're not really having a profoundly creative experience, but you're just using your glue gun to put sprinkles on everything. That would be artifice. So I'd like a little feedback, Ratana. Tell me about your creativity or lack thereof.
Well, when I look at something that looks like it needs my hands on it to create, I tend to feel like I hold back a little bit, or I just kind of create things in my mind and they don't come into fruition. And because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and so I want it done right and complete, otherwise I'm not going to touch it.
Chief obstacle of arrogance. Okay. Fear of being judged by others and being found wanting and being excessively self-critical.
Self-critical.
Yes.
Around that, yeah.
But do you have a natural affinity for a craft, cooking, art, music?
Yeah.
Well, music is, of course, you mentioned singing.
I love to sing. I love to cook. I love to. I'm really good with my hands. I've always manipulated everything with my hands.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
Going to massage school right now. So
yes, that's a craft. That's form and structure. Mm-hmm. Now, singing is a fifth chakra thing, and we more associate that with sages. But as I mentioned earlier, anything you could say about sages, you could to a lesser extent say about artisans and vice versa. And so you do have a lot of artisans who also sing. And remember, it's the expression axis, so self-expression. It can come through in a lot of different ways. Now, you have a discarnate artisan essence twin. Your essence twin is your twin soul or twin flame. And when this soul is discarnate, it's almost as if that soul is living within you, because they're not funneling their energy into their own life. And therefore, when you have a sage essence twin, you get some secondary energies of the role of sage. And so there would also be a love of insight. Insight's a key sage word. As a child, I would collect the quotable quotes column from Reader's Digest. I would tear them out, I would save them and highlight them. Sages love wisdom, and especially in a little nugget, that something that you can carry with you that can help help you understand how things are. Sages have a deep need to understand why things are the way they are. I've had people told me that I asked more questions than anyone they ever met in their life. That's a sage thing, wanting to know. It's a little different from the scholar desire to just absorb information, data. They're related, they're complementary, but they're not the same. Okay. I'm going to speak here. Yes.
I just wanted to say that when I first met Ratana, to me, the way she dresses and carries herself just, to me, screamed artisan. And would you say something to that? Do you think that is...
Oh, absolutely, yes. Artisan, particularly artisan females, their art might be in how they adorn themselves. So a lot of makeup and jewelry and artisans really generally don't want to be like everyone else because creation means creating something new, and it can be on your person. I have met artisans who have tattooed every square inch of their body. That is their self-expression. And again, sages do this, but less so. And I'm going to tell you why it's less so. There's a concept in the Michael teachings that is so useful called inputs. There are 7 soul types, as we mentioned. The 3 solid roles, by solid we mean that they're down to earth, are warrior, king, these are the 2 earthiest roles, and scholar, which are neutral. They have 1 input. And an input means they receive 1 piece of information from the universe at a time. They can only focus on what is in front of them, and that is how they are constructed as souls. And that alone, that 1 insight, explains so much about people. An input, if you have a TV or a stereo where you can plug different other units into them, those are inputs. The only difference is, see, with your stereo, you might have 5 other stereo components plugged into the receiver, but you only listen to 1 at a time. With the soul, if there's more than 1 input, they all come in at the same time. That's the difference. So, priests and servers are the 2 inspiration roles, and they have 2 inputs each. Servers, like all the other roles, they have 1 input for what's in front of them, current reality, and then their other input is kind of sideways, like common good. How can we take care of everyone's food, clothing, and shelter needs? They are nurturing people. Priests have 2 inputs, again, current reality, and higher good, which is how can we bring from heaven down to earth according to our vision of what would help people the most. Then you get to sages, and there's 3 inputs, and that's getting to be a lot compared to most people. And so sages have their current reality, and then I as a sage can also receive from you as an audience, and let's say we're performing together, I can receive from you. And that makes sages ideally suited to perform. And then we get to the artisans, 5 inputs, the only role with 5 inputs. And artisans are known to be potentially spacey, and this is why. You get 5 pieces of information coming at you at once at all times, and this is what allows you to be creative. Because let's say you're working on a piece of jewelry, and then this other idea comes floating in here, and you go, oh, that would really work well. I never thought of putting those together, and then this other thing comes in. So the more inputs you have, the more creative you can be, but you can also make you lose track of the world of space and time. Artisans are famous for working on their projects and like just getting so involved in them that they forget to eat, and they arrive 5 hours late for things. And discipline is very hard for artisans and sages because we want to create structure. We don't want to be hemmed in by other people's structure. Artisans, and especially artisans, but also sages, are often those children in school that are miserable. They're really smart, but the teachers think they're dumb because they're bored, and they want to be playing, and they want to be working with their hands, and they want to be performing, and they don't fit in. You hear a lot of sages and artisans just don't like other people's rules. We don't fit in real well in a corporate structure, for example. That can be really, really painful for us. Do you have any feedback on that? Is that your experience?
On which can you?
Anything, any of it.
I don't like microphones either. I don't feel like I need one because I will throw my voice out there. I move my hands. But yeah, that resonates with me with the being spacey and having all these ideas. I related it to I needed to make a necklace for somebody that had been asking me for it, and I just went to the beads store and picked everything, and instead of wanting to control putting it all together and putting my spiritual energy into it, I let go of that part and allowed somebody, the ladies, to do it. And that was really huge growth for me because I want to do it all and control it all. But the confusion gets in and I lose track of time, and I was very short on time. So what you had said totally made sense to me around why that is.
And jewelry making is quintessential artisan, right? Yeah. Yes. Yes, Dan.
Do the inputs strictly follow rules?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Now, the funny thing is let's say you are a scholar with a discarnate artisan essence twin, and you have that energy bleeding through. You are a scholar, and you have one input, but it mimics having 5 inputs, because the essence twin has those 5 inputs. And so, do we have any scholar with artisan essence twin here? That's you. Okay. Yes. Okay. I didn't remember your essence twin. And Dan has worked as a stagehand in the theater. Am I saying that right? Yeah. And what's that? And a dancer. Okay. So you're going to have those secondary traits of, I didn't know you were a dancer. Yeah. Secondary traits of the role of artisan. And you may simulate multiple inputs, but it's all coming through that one scholar input. And your basic nature is still assimilative. But people might mistake you for an artisan under certain circumstances, especially, what is your casting? Okay, I can look it up. But if you also had artisan casting, it would be very easy for Michael's students to mistake you for a low-key artisan. But here's another validation tip. Does this person process life predominantly through self-expression or through assimilation? And when we say that the assimilation axis is neutral, we don't mean that scholars don't have opinions. That is absolutely not what neutrality means. It's a much more subtle kind of thing. You might call it versatility. You might say that scholar neutrality means the ability, like when you put your car into neutral gear, you can put it into any other gear from that position. There is a flavor to neutrality that you can pick up. You can notice it, but it doesn't mean that people have no intensity, because there are a lot of things on your chart. If you were a scholar with a scholar essence twin and scholar casting and a goal of flow and a pragmatist and everything and stubbornness, everything was neutral, yeah, you would look pretty detached from things. But you have at least 20 pieces of information on your chart that could lend a lot of intensity besides just your role, and that we're not even talking about your astrology and your imprinting. So we don't want to generalize too much, and we don't want to jump to conclusions and say, you have to be this because I see this trait. You've got to look more deeply. Where's that trait coming from? Yes?
When you said the artisan has 5 inputs and has the most, what are they? Are they one from everyone has the other one? So
Yes, so everyone has current reality. And I have seen Yarbrough published, and I think I have it in my notes somewhere, but I haven't memorized it, what she got as far as what those different inputs were. But what Michael through me said is that they're modular, and that the artisan can stick into those other inputs whatever is going to be useful for that situation. So I see a couple of other channels head shaking, so I think they must agree with that.
It's like cable news. If I could explain something like cable news, it's like you got MSNBC channel, but it's all cable news. So you see an artisan, they look like a slot machine to me with 5 wheels with the inputs. And you can get a cherry on any wheel, or you might get 3 cherries on input. So when you look at an artisan, you might be looking right at them, but you know they're on another side channel. Sometimes you have to kind of go, hey, right here! Look at me, even though you're looking at me, so that they can lock in on the channel that you're on. So they kind of go sideways, like, no, I can look at it that way, I can look at it, come back, oh, okay. So,
could you quickly go through them? So current reality, higher good, present form.
Well, no, current reality, present form, same thing. Everyone has that one input. If you have additional ones, priests, second input is higher good, servers is common good, and with sages, one might be for audience and one might be for fellow actors. But you know what? If you're not performing, you've still got those extra inputs, so that you could be using them for something else. But the reason we think that warriors and kings are more powerful than the other roles is not because we all have access to the same amount of universal power, but it's because it's all compacted into that one input. And so whenever they're with you 100%, and if they're not with you, they're not with you at all. I have a funny story about this. Some of you know Thea Tupelo from Twin Oaks, and she's a scholar, and she was married to an artisan, and he would sit there reading the paper, and she'd be talking to him, and she would be angry and convinced that he wasn't paying any attention because he was still reading the paper and listening to her, and he would be able to repeat back to her everything she said. And this just didn't compute for her because as a scholar, she's not constructed that way. And so understanding the inputs made her more patient with that kind of behavior. He really was hearing her. And I've run into this with other scholars too. My friend Mayor would complain that I wasn't paying attention and I could repeat everything back to her that she was saying. So. But it's, when you have 3 or 5, it's more diffuse. So you're not getting 100% of your attention there. And it can be distracting. So sometimes those of us with multiple inputs will want to sort of close the blinds on some of the others so we can concentrate better. But concentration does not come as easily to us unless it's something we're really passionate about. Yes, Terry?
I just wanted to comment that I remember early on reading in messages from Michael that for artisans across all of their lives, the challenge is to focus all of your 5 inputs in one direction.
Yes.
yeah.
Instead of just having them scattered everywhere. So I just wanted to add that because that's been so valuable to me because that's what my whole life has been about. With King Essence Twin is trying to master that focus and bring all of my channels of input to bear on the task at hand, whatever that is. So.
Grounding is challenging for artisans and also sages because of all these inputs. And it comes relatively easily to the warriors and kings. So grounding helps. Steve, yes?
You made an allusion to education, and it's, would you say that that expressive roles like artisans tend to favor education that's much more hands-on, like vocational skills?
Absolutely, yeah.
Rather than the intellectual stuff, which is more current paradigm?
Yeah, and artisans are the role that are most likely to be brilliant and people think they're stupid. Because, now, and some artisans are very articulate because of like sage casting and sage essence twin. Sages are the most articulate role. But sometimes you'll get a kid in high school who is not doing well in his academic classes, and it might be just a lot more because he's not that interested rather than not being smart. But then, he's in auto shop and he just has an instinctive understanding of how to fix things, and he can visualize 3 dimensions. And this, if the kid got an IQ test, you might find out that he's a genius. But he's just not interested in the same things that the others are interested in. Whereas the scholars, and again, not 100% of the time, but the scholars tend to be the model students. And even an old scholar may enjoy being in an institution of higher learning and doing the homework and fitting within the structure. The solid roles tend to like fitting into structures. Like warriors can be very out of control children, but if they're sent to a military academy to shape them up, they will tend to look back fondly on that, or being in the military and the rules and that sort of thing. Artisans and sages would rather make up their own rules and change them. So it's just so useful to understand this. Sarah Chambers channeled that they're on more advanced planets. People routinely know this information, and they put children into the type of schooling that is appropriate for them. Yes?
I just got to say, as a warrior, there are a couple of things you said that really don't ring true for me, and I just wanted to throw it out there. First of all, I think Hillary's a warrior. When I watch her go into defense, it's total warrior, up in Trump's face, defending herself. So I'm shocked to hear you say she's an artisan. She doesn't feel like an artisan. She doesn't look like an artisan to me. I just want to throw that out.
I know, it's very controversial.
She's a warrior. I was going to say she is so warrior influence.
Okay, but this is not our focus.
I want to finish.
Stay on the topic of
I just want to say, that last thing you said about warriors not needing structure is true, but the older soul of the warrior, the less comfortable they are in there. I just wanted to throw
Yes.
that out.
Mm-hmm.
And since I'm the only warrior in the room, I felt I needed to add that little piece. So, I don't mean to interrupt, I'm just saying that it's, all of us are going to be channeling from our own point of view too, aren't we?
Yes. I'm well aware that probably the 2 celebrity overleaves that are the most controversial in the community are Hillary and George W. Bush. And I would like to talk about that a little bit this afternoon. And I may not change your mind, but I would like you to just try and emphasize looking at Hillary's face, her eyes, her expressions, the way she smiles, and then what you see as warrior. Could that possibly be coming from her imprinting, from her very hard, domineering father, and her early feminism, where she believed that you had to compete with men by being like a man. But because your role is your essence, it's not your personality. And this is a very key distinction that people mistake the two. This principle is so important in so many ways. It's like you meet someone and you have essence contact, you recognize that soul, you love that soul, and so you marry that soul, but then you find out that on a personality level it does not work. So we need to be able to discern what's personality and what's essence. And sometimes personality can obscure essence. This is why we call it false personality. If someone is mentally ill, if someone is, like let's say you see a very depressed sage, you're going to say that person can't be a sage. Yes, they can. They can be a depressed sage. And so they're not fitting the stereotypes. So we have to look beyond the surface. We have to go deeper. And if you know what warrior eyes look like and what artisan eyes look like, you will be able to validate that. And that is your surest guide. And then you can see, well, what I'm picking up is coming from somewhere else. So this is really such a key to the Michael community getting more accurate in working with this stuff. And when you have celebrities where you get 4 completely different versions of their role in overleaves from different channels who are good channels, there's an issue here that if we could all learn what a king looks like, what a server looks like, feels like, we're going to have much fewer of those kinds of discrepancies. And therefore, I think it'll be much easier to promote the teachings to the larger world, because they won't then be saying, well, why did this channel say this and this channel say that? When I do charts, I ask people to send photographs and their full name and their birth information. I like to have it for my records. I have a database with, at this point, 10,000 charts. And I don't need all of that. Michael, in most cases, could probably just do it from the full name, maybe the birth information. But it's another identifier, and what I do, this has been a learning game for me for many years, is I stare at that photo while Michael is getting ready to dictate the chart. And this has a dual purpose. It lets Michael really tune in deeply to that person. It's like whoosh, and then going to the Akashic record. And meanwhile, I'm taking a moment to improve my skills. Like, what do I see in that picture? What kind of eyes are those? And it's just one picture, and people can look different in different pictures. And I'm often wrong in my guess. But what I've found is that almost every time I'm getting the basic energies. So if I'm guessing warrior, king essence, twin, artisan, casting, those 3 things are in there somewhere, but maybe I just jumbled the order. So it's a little trickier to know whether you're seeing the core essence, which is the role, or whether you're seeing something secondary. But we can practice that. We can get better at that. Oh, I have just 12 minutes, unless the group wants to go a little bit longer. I would like to talk about the Yarbrough kind of casting, because I find it very interesting, and it is a little different from the community job responsibility, that sort of thing. According to Yarbrough on that, we're each a member of a group of 7 souls called a cadence. And there are many different kinds of cadences. Any group of 7 is a cadence, but your primary cadence, as I refer to it in the Michael teachings, is the 7 souls that were all the same role. In your case, 7 artisans that were cast from the Tao together. And you number off 1 through 7. Now, each of the numbers 1 through 7 correlate with each of the roles. And this is so elegant. If I had a lot more time, I would like to go into a lot more detail about the elegance of the numbers. But basically, 1 is server, 2 is artisan. So let's say if you're in the number 2 position in your cadence, you are the artisan cast artisan. If you're 3, you're warrior cast. 4 is scholar. 5 is sage. 6 is priest. And 7 is king. And the way that the position, well, so you are sage cast. It is where it says cadence position, 5. And 5 has a positive pole of expansion, a negative pole of adventure. That's the sage position. So out of your 7 artisans, you are the artisan whose responsibility it is to manifest in the sage domain. So out of all of the 7 of you, you are the best communicator. You are maybe the funniest one of the 7. And whereas if someone's in the warrior position, then you are the one who's best at getting things done. And you'll have a little warrior flavor. You don't feel like a warrior because you don't have that instinctive drive that that an actual warrior or someone with a warrior essence twin has. But you might act like a warrior and resemble warriors in some of your behaviors. The most trademark thing that I've noticed is king cast. Someone who's king cast. Now, because 7 is the last number, king casting is ordinal, but it still has that flavor of the role of king. And so I've seen so many king cast people who are snippy. They're abrupt. Think of Carolyn Mace, who is a sage, who's king cast, and there's that quality of, I'll cut you off right here, blunt.
She wields the mace.
Yes, she. Think of the king quality as the sword, as cutting through bullshit. Okay, this is what we're going to do. So it can be kind of abrupt. Now she's also in impatience, which is the king position obstacle. And so again, we're looking at the chart as a whole. There's more than one reason why she can be snippy. And I think as she's gotten older, she's tried to be more in her positive poles, and she's softened some of that. But your casting explains so much about you, and not just your primary casting, because your cadence is also in a group of 7 cadences. And that whole cadence numbers off 1 through 7. Your cadence, that's the second number, is 2, or in the artisan position. So what you have here is a fascinating chart, because you're artisan sage with sage artisan casting. And so clearly you, as an eternal spark of the Tao, when you were planning how you were going to experience this planet, thought, I think it would be fun to play with artisan and sage energy in combination in different ways with the casting. So you have, you are an artisan, but your secondary casting is also artisan, but that's cardinal. So you can do artisan things in the big picture as well as with craft. And you have sage bleed through, which is cardinal, but you have sage casting, which is ordinal. So you can do the full gamut of communication. I also have that. I'm a sage cast sage, and so I'm really good at one-on-one sage stuff as well as the big group types of things. Now, your whole greater cadence, now this is 49 souls, right, because it's 7 sevens, they also join in strings. And this is the one exception. It doesn't have to be 7 strings. It doesn't have to be 49, 49, 49, 7 times. It's just going to be until you run out of artisans. You are in your greater cadence is in the first position. And one is server, but what we also find is that when your greater cadence is first, it just underlines everything else. So it just makes your sage and artisan casting stronger. But it does give you a tiny flavor of server. It would be subtle at this point because it's a less important trait. But since I've spent so much time on the first 3 items on the chart, I'd like to do just sort of what is most interesting to me about the rest of the chart. You have higher male energy, 58%, 42. Male-female energy, yes. Mm-hmm. You will have a magnetic draw to partners, whether you're male-female, whether you're straight or gay. There is a magnetism to other people who have the opposite. There are many things on your chart that can create attraction with other souls, so it's not just this. This is just one element of that. But it does suggest that it's possible that you've had more male lifetimes than female. And I say it's possible because, on the other hand, artisans tend to like the female body because females are not expected to go to war, which is not the favorite thing for artisans and sages to do, whereas the solid roles love it. And they also get to do the crafts, the arts and crafts for the village, and the cooking and all that. So it's a matter of individual choice, but there is a likelihood you've had a fair number of male lifetimes, and in those male lifetimes, you might have been doing the construction, building the huts and making the nets and that sort of thing. The goal is, I think, the most interesting of the overleaves. And by some people's reckoning, there are 7 overleaves. Overleaves are simply personality traits that lay over or lay on top of your essence, and they can change from lifetime to lifetime. I constructed this chart, dividing it into essence and overleaves, so that you could at a glance see everything in the top half will be true of you on every lifetime you have as a human on Earth. And the bottom half, all of that can change from lifetime to lifetime. And what you choose for your overleaves will be based on what your life task is, what you're setting up, what are you trying to accomplish, and then you will choose the overleaves that are the best tools for you. What I find with the goals is that your goal determines a lot of the kind of life experiences you will attract to yourself. The most common ones are growth. 40% of us are in growth. And acceptance, 30% of us are in acceptance. I'm not sure, I think maybe 10% are in flow, but I run into a lot of people in flow. A person in growth will have a lifetime that is filled with challenges that if they work really hard, they can overcome. And they are busy people. They like being busy. Sometimes they can get overwhelmed with too much busyness, in which case they slide to the opposite one and chill for a while. But it's all about overcoming challenges. Whereas the goal of acceptance is you get a lot of challenges that you can't do a damn thing about. And all you can do is learn to like it or lump it. And for me, in my life, I'm in acceptance. The classic example was my mother dying when I was 8, having a nasty stepmother. And I'd rail against it, but my goal was acceptance. So I was always trying to accept it. I remember when I was in 5th grade, my mother had just died 2 years before, and I had this really mentally ill, cruel stepmother, and we were supposed to write a poem about our mothers for Mother's Day, and I was trying so hard to accept her, and I wrote a poem that said, well, I know she's doing the best she can. And so, you wrote the draft out in pencil, and then when you were going to present it to her, you had to copy it over in pen. And I kept messing it up in pen, and I kept having to start over because I just couldn't bring myself to accept her quite that much. With flow, you get a life where when you let go, your life works. When you push the river, it does not work. It's that saying, let go and let God. That was made for people in flow. And what I find is that almost everyone I know in flow, we all have life challenges, we all have traumas, we all have issues, but people in flow rarely have trouble getting a roof over their head, having enough to eat. They're the people who will regale you with stories such as, I was down to my last dollar and I just left it up to the universe and this check came in I didn't expect. And what is so useful about the goals is that when you go to spiritual groups, the leaders will try to teach you based on what their goal is. And so the people who are in flow will tell everyone the same rule for life. If you just let go, it'll all work out. Well, not if you're in growth. If you're in growth, if you're in growth, it'll work out if you work your ass off. And if you're in acceptance, it'll work out if you're peaceful. I'd like to say something about dominance and submission. People in dominance, their lesson is about leading, but they don't necessarily like leading. An artisan in dominance or a scholar in dominance looks very different from a warrior or a king in dominance, or even a priest or sage in dominance, which are cardinal roles and which like to lead. So if you have a goal that is like, I know I need to learn this lesson, but it's not what I'm most comfortable with, it's going to look very different on you. So artisans kind of like to be off on their own thing, but an artisan in dominance will find quite often that other people see that in them, and they maybe have agreements with them, and they keep asking them to lead, even though they don't want to. And they may even have a negative opinion of leaders. It's like one scholar in dominance that I knew was very troubled by this, because his father was a jerk who was dominating, and he always swore he would never be like that. But sure enough, in work, whatever he did, they were always putting Ken in charge. And he did it in his quiet, mild-mannered scholar way. He didn't do much dictatorship because that had left such a bad taste in his mouth, but he did do the positive pole leadership. On the other hand, my friend Chris, who I just visited, is an artisan in submission. And when I showed him subservience, he bristled at that, because no one was going to tell him what to do. His mother tried that, the warrior, and no way. And yet, you can see the devotion in his motivation. He's married to a lovely woman, and he's devoted to her. And he is an amazing artisan who can fix and build anything, and they bought a house and they're remodeling it. And she has champagne taste, and she goes out and she goes to Restoration Hardware, and she buys the nicest plumbing fixtures, and it's all so expensive. And he's saying, I'm going to have to work till I'm 70 to pay for all this. And yet he's devoted to her, and that's how he shows his devotion is, okay, you buy it, I'll install it, I love you, I support you. And she's playing the role of leader, but it's subtle. So a lot of these things come out in subtle ways. And if you want to be an expert in the Michael teachings, you've got to develop a feel for the subtlety. Yes?
Could you speak about discrimination?
Oh yes, I really shouldn't leave any out, should I? Discrimination is, it was originally called rejection. And that made it like a matched pair with acceptance, rejection. When you are in acceptance, your impulse is to say yes, and your lessons are about yes. So it's like, I don't really want to take this trip, I'd rather stay home, but I'm going to say yes to this because I know it's a good thing. And so a lot of lessons around yes. Discrimination are lessons around no. And you need a good, clean no for your yeses to be healthy. Just as you need a good, clean yes for your no's to be healthy. But yes is more important than no. So you're going to do the goal of acceptance much more often than the goal of discrimination. But especially if you've been saying yes too much, then you might choose a lifetime of no, of discrimination. The positive pole, sophistication, means that you develop refined tastes. You have a good sense of what quality is, and you know the people you want to have in your life and the people you don't want to have in your life, and you don't have much trouble deciding to exclude someone from your life, whereas that is painful for someone in acceptance. There have been over 30 years, I can only think of one person where I made a decision I'm not going to work with that person no matter how difficult they were, or even if I felt the questions that they wanted me to channel for, like were written channeling, that I felt that they were maybe not really very high or appropriate questions, I almost always say yes. So I have to learn to say no a little bit more to be in balance. The negative pole of discrimination is a knee-jerk no. And that can ruin your life. And this is very hard for a sage to do discrimination. That is what's called an abrading overleaf, where it's almost painful to have that goal, but it's a lesson that's needed. If the sage does it in the positive pole, it will be fine. Everything in the positive pole is beautiful. But we don't, any of us do always our positive poles. We're sometimes going to be in our negative poles. I have an uncle who is a very funny sage. Was a comedy writer for TV and movies. And his ex-wife said, and he was so prickly, goal of discrimination, his wife said he drives everyone away from him. And that was an unhappy, mature soul version of a sage doing discrimination. But some people, I would say the majority of my clients in discrimination do it quite skillfully, and you don't really, you don't notice it as prickliness. You just get that they are filtering things. They're being careful about what they let into their life. Does that fit for you? Are you in discrimination?
No, I don't think so, but I think a couple of people close to me have been channeled in discrimination. They're very different, but one to figure out. And also it's more difficult to understand when it's called rejection. You know, that sounds so
negative.
yes.
Well, the original channelings came through a small group in the Oakland Hills in 1973. They all knew each other. It was not public at first. They had all been Gurdjieff students before. They were using some of Gurdjieff's terms, and the terms did not need to be diplomatic. People were not taking it personally. They understood Michael was being descriptive, not judgmental, when they said rejection. And the role of slave. But as it became more public, a lot of us felt that it would be useful to have terms that weren't going to upset people. And especially the role of server was originally called slave, although if you read the earliest transcripts, they did occasionally use the term server even back then. So this was not a fabrication of the later channels. They would go back and forth a little bit. I think maybe some people even objected to it in the original group. But it's kind of, if you look at it in a really neutral way, a slave being someone who devotes him or herself fully to others, if you take away the idea of ownership, it's not a bad term, but it's not a diplomatic one. And the goal of reevaluation is the rarest of the goals, but it's the opposite of growth. And those of you in growth do slide there to chill. And everyone I've known in reevaluation has said the same thing to me. All my life, all I've wanted is just to have a quiet little cottage by a lake or a cabin in the woods and just, a dog and a fire and some books to read. So what that suggests is that they've been very busy souls. And this is a life where they would kind of like things to be quieter. I think I've run out of time. Are we all ready to conclude?
I do have one quick
Oh,
question.
Pauline, is that okay? Yeah.
On her center, I would have guessed moving center versus physical. Can you give me some clarification?
Okay. Pauline asked, because you know her, you would have thought she's moving center. Fidgety, yes.
I feel bad for her too, though. No, but I do move all the time. I do. I be swaying all over the place.
Well, that's physical.
That's
Moving,
why
yes.
When I saw that, I was like,
The two body centers are misunderstood, and there are a lot of different versions of what these mean. So when it was first channeled, the ordinal action center was called the sexual center, which really means the same thing as physical center, meaning that it's about excitation of the body, but not necessarily sexual arousal. So that's why I chose to call it physical center. But some other early channeling then called the cardinal center, the sexual center, because they were interpreting that as the sex with a capital S, where you're in union with the cosmos and you're having this kind of higher centered experience. And so a lot of this boils down to how are you defining this. And what I've settled on is that the physical center is ordinal and the moving center is cardinal, moving in the sense of moving the whole body, because moving the whole body is bigger than an excitation of the cells or the nerves of your body. Now, some of the channels go moving for ordinal and higher moving for cardinal, meaning a higher moving meaning exalted energetic states. And so, however the channel has defined it, that's what's going to show up on your chart. But what we know about any traits that share the axis of the overleaves, they can slide to each other very easily. And so what can happen, people who are physically centered, their first reactions are in their body, like you feel cold, you feel hot, your stomach gets upset, you're nauseated if you're upset by something. Is that true for you? It hits your body first, but then because moving center is right next door, it's very easy for that body discomfort to make you then want to move the body. So it slides there. It can go there very, very fast. And then you're in, once you have that reaction, you're in the intellectual part, meaning that your thoughts take form from how your body is experiencing its environment. And so if you want to change your thoughts, if you're having negative thoughts, like you're just complaining about everything, simply because your body is uncomfortable, does it happen to you? Then find a way to make your body more comfortable by soaking in a hot bath, getting a massage, doing deep breathing. And as soon as you get your body more comfortable, your thoughts will get cleaned up from that. This is another example of spiritual or growth teachers teaching you how to make yourself feel better based on what works for them. This does not work for everyone. This works for this centering. I'm intellectually centered in the emotional part. If I have negative thoughts, I can get depressed. If I change my thoughts, I can change my emotions. And this is what, Louise Hay will tell you to do. Change your thoughts, change your emotions. It does not work for everyone. And this is why these charts are incredibly useful to know what's going to work for you. Now, Ed?
So I may have missed this, but let's say someone who's a dancer or martial artist or very conscious physical action, is that the higher one or the lower one?
On my charts, the moving centered people tend to be the dancers and the athletes. People who are physically centered, again, it used to be called sexually centered, your physical body is out front, and therefore people will tend to react to you quickly sexually. People who are sexually or physically centered, other people tend to think that they are sexual. Now, I don't have any body centering, and people don't react to me that way at all, unfortunately. So, pros and cons to all the centering. I'm intellectually centered. I'm really good at this stuff, but I'm not so good at that stuff. So, but dancers most often are moving centered. Sometimes you see they're emotionally centered in the moving part, and that gives them the gift to express their emotions through their movements. It also that combination of centering is the most impulsive of any centering. And it's gotten confirmed every time. If I get someone emotionally centered moving part, and I'll say, are they impulsive? Yes, because nothing's getting filtered through the intellectual center. They are acting on their emotions. And the way for them to get balanced is to pause, and instead of acting on their emotions, just go for a run. And then let their mind come in and filter it, like saying, is this really a good idea? Is this really what I want to do? But even though all the centerings are beautiful and good and worthwhile, this is the combination that is most likely to get someone in deep trouble if they haven't learned how to edit that. And again, you have to look on everything on the chart as a whole. If you are a scholar or a sage, you have a very well-developed intellect. Even if you have that centering, you are used to thinking about things. You still need to be deliberate, but you don't have to, it's not as hard for you. Whereas if you're an artisan with that centering and you're sort of more used to going with your gut anyway, you could run headlong into a lot of problems.
Well, I thank everyone, and especially you, Shepard. That was awesome, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Yay!